Hello, everyone. This is Peter Geovanes for CDO Magazine, and I am delighted to do this episode with Dr. Christina.
Hi, Peter.
How are you today?
I'm great. And, you can call me Christina. We can be
I
a,
want to give you all the respect that you were due, so I apologize for the formality. Why don't we start off, Christina? Give us your background. I know you've had a great career, really interesting, and I'm really excited about what you're doing now as well.
well, thank you. Yeah, I started my career in the nonprofit world, working with Care International. One of my most interesting, most challenging roles, because at the time that I was working there, and I was building a system for them to do their impact measurement and performance uh, reporting globally. The internet was not very, very stable in a lot of the countries that they operated in. And so, my first experience with teaching people how to deal with data was actually mailing technical manuals that I had written on how to use the system and, uh, you know, through DHL to all the country offices with Excel sheets that would allow them to do everything offline and then submit whenever they had a little bit of internet into the online system so that we could collect that data. So very interesting beginning, but that was my intro to data. And after that, I moved on to Deloitte and was there for 9 years through different roles. Ended my career there managing taxonomy and reference data. And then I moved on to Nike, where I was chief data steward. And so, uh, interesting industry experience, kind of moving across different places and dealing with data, but definitely all the roles had commonality. I always worked in a global role in highly matrix environment and always stood in the gap between technology and the business of the organization. And so now I'm on the next part of my journey as an entrepreneur, co-founding Datum Cafe with a colleague of mine that I used to work with at Nike, Amy Harrelson. And we are bringing all of that best practice that we've learned from, across industries about really how to help, organizations engage the people in data initiatives so that they can be successful and to be able to do it at scale.
Well, let's talk about these best practices because my experience, and it sounds like yours as well, is you'll step into an organization and there'll be, for lack of a better word, these kind of data silos or data kingdoms, and they're very fragmented, right? How do you break that down? How do you get people to talk to each other? What's your best practice for that?
I think it really comes from really understanding that it's a two-way relationship with your data team. And so it's very easy, I think, to go down the path of receiving requirements because you're highly focused on trying to deliver value quickly and prove the relevance of the data team. But the data team is only as effective as the partnerships it has with other organizations. And that education really has to happen, at the top level of the organization. And so, for example, um, we think about a department like HR. Yes, they may have requests to the data team about what they want to do with their data, but the data team should also be able to ask HR for their support in changing certain things in the organizations to enable that, right? And so if we think about how difficult it is and how much it slows down teams to identify stewards because it's not consistent role in the organization, the way that it's difficult to get people to prioritize time towards working with the data team, because it's not part of performance management. Like there's a lot of things that data teams have to do with each of the departments of the organization that end up being enablers and accelerators to them being able to deliver the value. And so it's really about figuring out like what is that thing that I need from this department to help support me to deliver the thing that they want.
And what I've noticed too in my role as chief data officer, chief data and analytics officer is these departments, you mentioned HR, seem to know their data inside out. But I think where the real magic happens, and I definitely want to hear your experience here, is when we're able, I use the analogy of a recipe. We can take some of the ingredients that might be some HR data with a little bit of marketing data, and maybe we'll sprinkle in today a little bit of accounting data. But that's where the magic happens. But in my experience, this is where organizations fall flat is they don't have anyone that has that kind of 360-degree view of the data and can kind of think maybe creatively or innovatively about what can we do with these ingredients in our virtual refrigerator. What's your thoughts there?
Well, I think it's actually a two-part problem because I mean there are definitely organizations out there that are figuring out how to get that 360 view of their data, but the reality is that just having the view of the data without the understanding or the context of the data means that like anything that you develop may not work as you expect because it's not suited to the data that you used, and it's just because you lack the understanding. And so there's a way that the business that is the owner of that data thinks about things like what is quality to them, that you just may not have that context within your data team in order for you to be able to say like we're using really good quality data to affect this outcome that we're after. And even for things like most recently, I was chatting, with a colleague, and they were telling me about how they were having challenges with the engineering team because they happened to see data that was associated as financial data that was showing as accrued in a future year, like we hadn't even reached that time. The engineer didn't have the context that the organization has multiple calendars, right? And so some of those calendars reference things in the future. And the business understood that that's how the calendar works. And for the sake of that type of reporting that meets that calendar, there is a context for why it seems like this is an unreal case, right? And so it's that collaboration where you get that expertise that someone can explain that to you. And then now you can do more interesting things because you understand how to use it. You're not going to discount it and say, well, this is bad data because it doesn't suit the calendar that I like to use. And there are lots of examples of that. Like in my prior role, I remember, location data was one that was really, really difficult to figure out because there was just different ways that the organization thought about locations. For example, they would hire remote people in areas where they didn't have a business location. And so now they have these countries in the list where they're like, well, there is no operation here, but yes, we have payroll. We pay people those people have benefits. They have pensions and things and legal things that we're supposed to like care about as an organization. So you can't just delete the location because we don't have a business office. And then you go to another department and they say, well, yeah, like even if we had an office there and the office is gone, legally we have to retain the records for 7 years. So we still need to keep this legacy location inside our list. And so really being able to understand like why is the business doing certain things the way that they're doing them, and then being able to, from a technology standpoint, think about those creative use cases, like that contract between the technology teams and the business teams is really, really important in getting the right outcomes from your data.
So I guess one of the newer, I'm going to call it buzzwords that I've heard come up in the last 12 to 18 months is data fabric. I'm not sure I really understand exactly what is meant by data fabric, but it also sounds like you're kind of alluding to it's not the tool itself, it's also maybe a change management process on top of these tools. Can you comment on that? Help me out here. Help me understand.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think that when we're thinking about the data fabric, we're trying to ensure that we can find and see all our data irrespective of where it is, right? But again, that's one half of the equation. Like you can have a pool of just bad data that you're looking at. You still need context and business engagement and people that have accountability for that data that can make decisions about it and understand the impacts even of doing some of those things. I always think about like this example of one of the companies that I worked for where contract data, different organizations had it. So if you think of your data fabric, you have a room that has procurement contract data. You have a room that has legal contract data. And then you also have HR in another room with their contract data. And all of this is being managed across different systems. Absolutely, the fabric gives you the view, right? Like you're able to now look across all of that contract data. But when it comes to decisions about the contract data, who is on point? Who owns it? Right. And so it's that part that often gets missed. And it's important to be able to work back upstream and say, okay, HR, procurement, uh, legal, who is on point for this? And then how do we form, a decision body, a stewardship that is responsible for the care of this data, and that we are able to understand how each of us is using it, so that when we're doing things, whether it's putting quality around it or cataloging it and providing descriptions about it and so on and so forth, we can be consistent and agree that that's what it means, so that others that are using it are able to understand it the same way, right? And so it always ends up being a two-part problem. The one I feel tends to feel maybe easier because our tools have become so advanced and can do so much for us. And even when we think about things like, well, we don't really need the people because we can auto generate descriptions for these things, but organizations are nuanced and have unique ways of why they do what they do. And so sometimes the canned description that you get out of, a chat GPT that says, this is what this means is not exactly accurate. And then that means that it will ultimately result in like misuse because people don't properly understand that data.
Thank you for your time today. Thank you for your insights. I wish you and your partner and Data Cafe all the best. And
Thank
thank you
you.
from CDO Magazine.
Thank you so much. It was fun chatting with you, Peter.